Welcome, everyone. I'm hearing some feedback. Everyone go on mute. Just stay much better. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I am Holly Corbett. I'm the Director of Content at Consciously Unbiased. It's a movement to build belonging in the workplace. And today, the topic of our LinkedIn Live is, why don't workers want to go back to the office? So we're hearing a lot of news about the Great Resignation, where we're seeing a trend in employees quitting their jobs. A recent Gallup poll found that as many as 48% of American workers are actively seeking other positions. So there's many reasons behind this trend, such as the pandemic fatigue, a labor shortage, and also the fact that more employers are calling their employees back to the office. In fact, as many as one in three employees are saying they'll quit if they have to go back to the office. So we have some amazing panelists here to talk about this today. So we'll start off by introducing our guests. Could each of you say who you are, what you do, and what you're hearing from your own clients as being some of the biggest reasons behind this trend of the Great Resignation? Dr. Plummer, do you want to start?
Absolutely. I am so excited to be here. I am Dr. LaNail Plummer, the CEO of Onyx Therapy Group, which is a mental health company headquartered in Washington, D.C. We're 9 offices in 4 states and love to focus on mental health. So one of the main things that we're seeing across our client base in terms of the conversation around returning back to work and maybe some anxiety that's being built is that many folks are deciding to resign as an employment boundary. They believe that it's important for them to be able to, they know that they have the skill set and the capabilities to do the work and to likely do it from home or to do it from remote places that allow for them to balance out and have harmony in their mental health. Sometimes the workplace in itself causes stress, whether it's related to the commute or some of the interactions that are happening between colleagues, or some microaggressions or some micromanagement. And when they're able to work remotely, they have a little bit more freedom and a lot more control over their mental health. And when they're not given that opportunity, they feel devalued and less supported. And recognizing that there's other companies that could potentially allow them to do remote work and to still be successful. So what we're finding is that many of them are coming to therapy and processing what it would look like if they resign from their positions that are forcing them to go back into the office, more so because they believe that they can have more harmony in their work-life balance and more in their physical and mental health balance and productivity if they're allowed to continue to remain remote.
Great. So you're saying it's a personal boundary?
Yeah. Definitely around the boundary, because they're able to see that they're able to produce the work. The things that are listed in their job description are areas of their performance evaluation. They're able to do it and do it at home, or to do it, in the mountains, or do it at the beach, or do it next to their aging parents, or do it next to their toddlers. They're able to still do it and have balance. And not necessarily have to go into the office. And I know we'll talk about it a little bit later, but sometimes the environment has a major impact on our mental health as well. And sometimes office environments are not conducive. Excuse me, sometimes office environments are not conducive to mental health.
Thank you. Julius, do you want to go next? Oh, you're on mute.
Hello, everyone. Julius Boatright here. I am the founder and managing director of Still Smiling. So we are a community-based nonprofit organization here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we focus primarily on Black mental health and connecting folks to the appropriate level of supports and services that they need. And I would just echo what Dr. Plummer said in her answer. I feel like I'll likely be doing that a lot because Dr. Plummer makes excellent points all the time, but people are really taking ownership over valuing their own self-care, mental, psychological, spiritual well-being. And folks are realizing that they can take care of themselves better at home, right? Like Dr. Plummer said, they can be there for their family members. They can be there more for themselves. And if it's something that you can do at home in your own space, then why not encourage that, and why not adapt to that change in employee behavior?
Mm, great points. And Kristy, how about you?
Well, thanks so much for having me here today. I'm excited to talk about this topic, which has honestly been coming up every day in conversations I'm having with workers and leaders and managers. But I'm Kristy Wallace, the CEO of Ellevate Network, which is the largest community of women in the workplace. We span function, geography, career stage, and more, and really look to provide the support and community that women need to thrive and succeed at work. Something that has been top of mind for our community during this time is really uncertainty. And the idea of going back to a workplace when other things are so uncertain, school closures, health and wellness of those in your community, what's happening in this world, it feels a little bit forced because there's so many other factors and variables that you are contending with. And so the idea of then adding, these guardrails, which in many ways guardrails are helpful, they provide direction, can be a little stifling when you're trying to understand what the future looks like when we've seen the past year and a half to be so uncertain.
Yeah, and things keep changing, just when we think we've kind of gotten through it a little, again, it switches up with the Delta variant. So I think that ongoing uncertainty is fueling a lot of anxiety. It's hard not to be able to plan, not know what's going to be able to happen next. So thanks for that point. And Tuska, last but of course not least, love to hear from you.
Thank you. And also a pleasure to be here with these amazing panelists, and excited for this, what I know will be a deeper dive conversation about this important topic. So I'm Tosca Di Matteo, founder of Tosca Coaching and Consulting. I spent 20 years in corporate environments, and the very last thing that I did before I left was try to create a position to help the organization with culture. And that wasn't something they were interested in at the time. So I am on the outside now as a corporate whisperer, helping organizations to create human-centric workplaces. And oh boy, is there so much work to do with that. And in answer to your question, I think everybody's comments around boundaries and guardrails and mental health all plays a role. And I think I lather it all up to people are having an awakening to their own power, to say, you know what, maybe I don't have to sacrifice so much. Maybe actually I can dig into my truth a little bit and find out what I need and want and actually honor that. Because I think companies have been operating so long on the basis that like employees are lucky to be here. And now employees are like, you know what, maybe it's a little bit more of an abundance mindset to say, hey, I can find something that actually works for me, and I'm going to go find that. And there will be workplaces that accommodate. So that's my take on why people are leaving. They're waking up and they're saying, I'm taking my power back.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I wrote a Forbes story where I wrote, people are now switching from live to work to a work to live mindset. And I think this has been a collective crisis. Whenever we experience crisis on an individual level, it requires us to take a step back and think about what matters most. And this has been such an unprecedented and historical moment where globally we have had to take a step back and really think about things. And in a way, we've gotten some space to do that as we've kind of slowed down on doing so much. But on another note, we've also been busier than ever plugged in, which we will get to today. We got a lot to unpack. But I'd love to just get your opinion on, as we're hearing all this news of the Great Resignation, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about why the Great Resignation is taking place, about why people are quitting in such big numbers?
It's interesting that you say that, Holly. One of the things that always makes me laugh is when someone says, well, people are quitting because they have all this government support, right? The government stepped in and helped out a lot when folks were forced into unemployment for various reasons. And so I'm often hearing people say, well, if the government stops giving support, then people are going to go back to work. And it's interesting, it's not those folks who are necessarily the ones that are resigning, right? It's actually folks who have been working through this pandemic and who are now being forced to go back into offices or into workspaces or into environments that weren't conducive to their own self-care. The other interesting thing that took place during this pandemic is that so many people started focusing on self-care because they could. They started taking midday walks. They started eating differently. They started paying attention to their sensory experiences, what they were looking at, what they were hearing. And they found fulfillment and contentment and satisfaction. And nobody wants to give that up. Nobody wants to give up the fact that they can't look at their plants throughout the day because plants aren't allowed in the office, or that they can't go out for a walk because their break is only 15 minutes when it actually could be 30. And so people are starting to grieve the loss of self. You're telling me I'm going to lose elements of myself. I'm going to lose my satisfaction and my contentment just so I could be in a building so that you can potentially micromanage me. And some industries do require us to be face-to-face. In mental health, there is a large preference of being face-to-face because you can interact with your clients a little differently. But that's not the case in all industries, right? And so some of us as employers, our supervisors need to be considerate that our employees may be resigning because they're grieving the potential loss of self. They're grieving the potential loss of self-care. They're grieving the potential loss of satisfaction, and they don't want to give that up. And they don't have to give that up because there's other companies that'll allow them to be successful, use their skills and talent, and still prioritize their self, their care, and their mental health.
You just actually answered my next question. I mean, while some people really welcome going back to the office, the reason for those who dread going back to the office, it's varied, it's personal, and I'd love to hear from the rest of you. What are some of the reasons you're hearing from your clients on why people don't want to go back to the physical office?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I think, and also to touch on some of the misconceptions that are out there is one that, being in an office 5 days a week, 8+ hours a day is the right way to be. I mean, why is that structure in place? The structure's in place because it's always been there and we've just continued to keep it going. And we are in, I think, a very unique time where we can really evaluate those structures and why do they exist and what really works for us as a society, for our employees, for our company. And so that's one aspect of questioning those structures. Like, why? Why go back to office? Why not a hybrid? Why not some other structure that works best for your organization? I think a year and a half ago, if we had said everyone was going to work remotely, that would seem ludicrous to many, but we've done it and we've done it pretty successfully. So question those structures, just don't slide back into what existed before. And also, a misconception is that companies can't do anything about the Great Resignation. I think that's completely untrue. There's a lot companies can do. And part of that is looking at your employees for who they are as humans with a diverse array of needs, identities, expectations, and experiences. And how do you put the employees first and align that with what you as a business leader are trying to do? What do they need? How do you motivate them? How do you keep them inspired and engaged? And see the impact that will then have on your ability to not only hit business objectives, but to keep employees within your organization and to keep them supported and engaged and moving forward. So there's a lot there that I think is really an important aspect to think about as we go back to this conversation of going back to the workplace. And some of the reasons too that people are hesitant to do it. I mentioned uncertainty before. I'm a mom of 3. I have no idea what's going to happen when school goes back in. Some of my support structures have gone away during this time, so I'm trying to figure that out. We're a little bit shell-shocked from what has happened over the past year and a half. So as we think about why people may or may not want to go back in, and to be fair, many people do want that in-office experience. I think it's understanding really what's the minimum viable situation. What does your workforce need to be human and to be supported? And how can you move forward in a way that's maybe new and different than the way you did it before.
Yeah, and I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said, the workplace rules, maybe they need to be changed. They were written a long time ago, and now it's time to adapt and transform to the new environment. And the fact that, the digital era allows us to be able to do so much outside of the office is key. Tusker, Julius, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. The last point you just said, Holly, about sort of the way that things are transitioning and this shift with the way that we do business, I think that's one of the bigger things that we need to find a deeper understanding for, because we're almost like, dare I say, like grieving the way that we've done business before. So there's different stages of grief, and I think as executives and policymakers and HR representatives, we're now having to reimagine what efficiency looks like, what processes look like, and how we include like emotional intelligence and empathy into those processes. I mean, we've heard time and time again that, right, this new generation, and it's usually like not a strengths-based way of referring to the new generation. Well, the new generation doesn't want to work. The new generation doesn't want to do this or that. And that's not the truth. It's that the new generation is redefining the way in which they do work, using technology to leverage those things, and still having a high level of emotional intelligence at the core of those policies and practices as well. So I think we have to be mindful and intentional about the grieving process of what was, and then sort of this reimagining and reemerging of what is now and what will be in the future.
Yeah, Julius, and I think, in the quote unquote old workplace, emotional intelligence wasn't as highly valued, but I've been reading all this research that says EQ is an even higher predictor of success in the workplace than IQ. So really focusing on the development of EQ and leaders who have EQ is so important, especially as we're transitioning in these uncertain times. Tosca, what about you?
Yeah, I think everything, around the archaic way of doing things, questioning status quo, like all of these things, the grieving are very important. I also think, it comes down to our employees being seen. And if they're not being seen in the workplace, and then they're at home and they can have a better kind of mental health situation, right? Because they're in their space and they can, be in the vibe that serves them, then why go back to an office where they never felt seen in the first place? Not to mention all the added burdens that have been placed on, unfortunately, people of color that are not being, financially rewarded or otherwise, or even given added resources for doing, for kind of like being re-traumatized in some cases, because they're being asked to do the work of, PR and those types of things. And so it's like, if you've been overtaxed over the past year and a half, and now the company kind of seemingly wants more from you without really addressing, like, how do we help employees feel seen? How do we give them what they need that looks like beyond the benefits of 401k or the basics? Like, how do we actually maybe help people with somatic work or other modalities, beyond some of the, traditional things? I think that all of this plays a role in terms of, companies basically have not taken the lead on ensuring they're doing the right things. And now is the moment where you either say, okay, like, I'm putting my money where my mouth is and I'm putting my employees first, or they're going to continue to see people go to places where they can feel more seen and they can feel like they belong.
So, Tosca, what are some ways that companies can take the lead in figuring out what their employees need during this time and delivering it to them?
I think a big way that they can take a lead is dismantling what I believe is like the number one factor that suppresses people and takes away the magic and kind of strips people from the magic. And what that is get rid of this paradigm model of power over that leaders use, like, without even thinking about it. to really say, how do I share power? How do I really do my own work? How am I empathetic with myself so I can be empathetic with the folks that I'm working with? And the list goes on, but I think that the power over structure, and it also requires some education and some learning for a lot of folks out there who only know one way to lead. And there's a lot of other ways that we need to be leaning into right now to create more human-centric workplaces.
And Holly, if I could add into my fellow Virgo here, I'd also say that employers need to be trusting the people that they hire. When they hire the employees, they're hiring them to do a particular job, to use their skill set, to use their talent, and recognizing that they're humans as well. And I find that a lot of micromanagement occurs because managers and supervisors don't necessarily have trust in the experience with their employees. And because of that, they believe that if I don't trust you, and no one says that aloud, right? Because that's not professional, and it sounds very toxic, but they demonstrate it in their behaviors, and it may even be a subconscious thought that just kind of carries over and comes out. But I believe that if employers started trusting the people that they hired more, then we would be in a different circumstance, which means that there probably needs to be a shift in the HR process, in the interviewing process, the recruiting process, the questions that are being asked, so that we're not asking questions just about a person's skill set or talent, but about the essence of who a person is, because that is what this pandemic has brought forward. We are now looking at our staff members and our employees as humans, right? In the mental health field, we've always done that, but looking at people as humans and the essence of who they are and their unique qualities and experiences and how they bring that into the workplace. And so I believe that some of the shifts may need to happen, not just in the mindset of the supervisors and employers, but in the structure of the HR departments and the recruiting processes as well.
Yeah, thinking
more, Dr. Plummer, and I also I think another aspect of that, as we look at the recruitment, is also the retention piece of it, right? And so, yes, it's management, it's trust. I mean, trust is, I think, central to human relationships, and it's not something that's given easily within workplaces. But there's also the interpersonal connections. When we talk about, and my work is really looking at, women in the workplace and women of colors and how we continue to move forward. And a big barrier has always been, who's in the room, who has the voice at the table, who is, at that networking event or getting the opportunity with some of the decision makers. And that's something that has been kept from us for way too long. And as we look to the future of these hybrid workplaces or virtual workplaces, who's, again, not in the room, whose voice isn't heard, who's more inclined or maybe has more privilege to be able to be back in person in an office versus who's home with other responsibilities or keeping their family safe. What are those decisions that they're making? And so as companies are looking, again, not just at the recruitment piece of it, but it's the retention. How are you building those connections, that informal mentoring, that support within your organization? You have to be much more intentional about that now. It's not running into someone in the kitchen, around the virtual, the essential water cooler. It's about really understanding the structure of your organization, how you're building in some systems to ensure that connections are made, that conversations are being had, that your employees are supported wherever they are. And that's something we've heard quite often from the women in our community, is that over the past, year and a half, they feel like they've lost touch with leadership. That when they're at a virtual meeting, they don't know how to, have their voice heard because a lot of those physical cues are no longer there. That they're not getting the face time with decision makers and losing out on opportunities. And so that's a big piece of company intentionality that we need to be able to say, okay, what are these structures going to look like? And then how do we put in the work to ensure that we're not sliding backwards on the progress, which we still need to be making, to support our employees, to diversify our workforce, and to create access to opportunities for all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, how do you do that? How in this, the traditional workplace was people sitting at a desk for knowledge workers between 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. And now that's no longer the case. And we spend a lot of time in front of our computers. I've seen a lot of companies doing virtual happy hours, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. I think that's fizzled out because we've been spending so much time in front of our computer. But can you offer advice on how to really build those connections and an environment where everybody's voice can be heard and people are seen when we're not physically together face to face?
And I can share some of the things we've been doing at Ellevate, and we've also been doing this with our corporate partners and the companies that we work with. So one is, we started doing at the beginning of the pandemic these weekly roundtables. There's always kind of a hook. There's a topic that's relevant to you individually, if that's setting boundaries, relevant to you as a manager, if that's how to support your team and better communicate in a virtual environment. Maybe something that matters to you as a human and your greater impact on the world. But we tee it up with a quick, peer enlightenment or conversation on the topic, something that's going to set the stage. But we always go into smaller breakout rooms, take that topic deeper into our own personal experience and lives, and build connections with others. So that's something that's really we've been struggling with during this time, is those kind of how are we continuing to connect with others, to have conversations that are meaningful, that aren't passive. Happy hours can be tough because maybe you're just sitting there on the screen watching, other people drink. Maybe you don't drink. Maybe you have work to do. You have other responsibilities. But this is something where it's about your personal and professional development, giving the space that you need to have these conversations, to learn from peers, to build deeper relationships. And these are all things that companies can do. How are you making the space? At Ellevate, we created community hours for our team to come together and process what's happening in the world, to make space for that. Because when you walk into an office, whether it's a virtual office or an in-person office, you don't leave your identity at the door. The world doesn't stop. And so being able to talk about that in an open and honest forum with your colleagues makes you feel more connected, makes you feel less alone. There's a number of examples of just how are you starting to make those spaces, to acknowledge the humanness that is in your workplace and to provide that support and awareness. But when you think one-on-one as well, and you look across, the structure of your organization, it's really important for leaders, for managers, to be very intentional about who aren't you seeing every week, who's not at your regular meetings, who's not, at those virtual spaces that you're in, and reach out to them. Plan that in your calendar. Put it in your calendar every week. Who should I be reaching out to? Ask your HR team. Ask your other direct reports. Who should I be connecting with? And be very intentional about that, and not just pinpoint a select few, because there's a lot of bias that goes into that, but everyone within that structure and that organization that you can meet with, to show, one, that you're listening and that you care, and two, to build that rapport and connection that will serve that individual as they move forward in their career.
Yeah, so it's about just being very intentional in reaching out to people, and also maybe not just making it all about work, like making time to not have a work agenda during your call and check in and see how people are doing. I think that's so important during this time. Does anybody else have anything they want to say?
I would agree and echo that sentiment that Kristy brought up. Having those conversations that aren't solely focused on the bottom line and activities and outcomes and outputs, because we're having those conversations 90% of the time, right? And I've found that I've learned the most valuable pieces of information about our staff people and our team members and consultants when in the first 5 minutes of the conversations, in the last 5 minutes, when someone starts talking about their weekend plans or how they have to travel to take care of a sick or ill family member, they start to bring those things up. And if you don't make enough space intentionally to talk about those to whatever degree they're comfortable talking about them and sharing, then you will never be able to get that information to be able to figure out how you could best support, lead, and manage that individual, right? So I can't say enough of what Kristy mentioned about being intentional about making that time to have those conversations. And a second piece of that point I want to add is that I think we need to challenge this narrative that talking about one's emotions in the workplace is a sign of weakness, and that it somehow indicates that you can't be a high performer on a consistent basis because you're too emotional, right? We don't know if you'll be able to deliver, if your mental health will get in the way. I think it's actually the opposite narrative we need to start to adapt and uplift, is that when people are emotionally vulnerable, and they are sharing those moments with folks and those vulnerabilities, it shows how courageous they are and how much strength they have and how they can actually deliver in the most difficult of situations and circumstances. So I think it's also up to employers to start making space for those narratives to be uplifted and celebrated as well.
Absolutely. I keep doing this, right, Holly? I'm like, this is so good. This is great. With what Julius was saying, it goes back to the concept of emotional intelligence, which is what we were talking about a few minutes ago, right? And the articles and books that you've been reading about it, Holly, in that the emotional intelligence is what really drives connections. And when we know that people feel connected and they feel empowered and they feel valued, that's when they have the best productivity. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in an office. It doesn't necessarily have to be in one station place, because the creative juices and the innovation and the thoughts, they happen in all sorts of places. One can be out on a walk and have a wonderful idea and create a plan right there on that walk and make something beautiful for their company, something that's extremely productive. So if we started valuing humans more and the human experience and the emotions that come with it, like Julius is saying, then I think we're going to have higher retention, and we're going to have people who are more engaged and higher morale in the workplace. And that way they're going to get the bottom line met. The productivity is always going to be there when the human is valued more than the product. Always. It's always going to happen, because people are going to feel seen and empowered, and they're going to want to give back to those people who make them feel seen. It's a sense of reciprocity that comes with that human experience. If you see me and you make me feel good, I want you to see more of me. And in order to do that, I'm going to give more to you, and I see you. And it's this flow that happens. And when employers and supervisors are just focused on outcomes and not person-centered, then they lose folks, right? And not only do they lose folks, they lose product, they lose revenue, they lose reputation, and so much more. So I guess the major takeaway for me is, if people could just start valuing the humans that are working with them and not just the skills that human possesses, then we're going to see that people feel more valued at work, and everybody is going to have this sense of harmony in the place.
Right. And I mean, business is, of course, about the bottom line, but the truth is that if people are a company's greatest resource. So if you're investing in people, if you're making them feel safe, if you're making them feel heard, they're going to be happier, more engaged, and more productive, which is good, of course, for the company. But what about in terms of creating space to better address emotions in the office? Any guidance for managers or leaders on how to do that? Is there questions to make a habit of asking, or something that you can do in the way that you show up? Just some guidance, because this is new territory for a lot of people. A lot of us aren't used to sharing personal things in a work environment, but it's hard not to now, with the pandemic collectively impacting us all and everybody seeing each other's lives on Zoom.
If I can jump in, I think that leaders can't ask their employees to do things that they're not willing to do themselves. So I think that and I consider a leader, you are a leader wherever you are in the organization, right? You have the power wherever you stand, whatever your title is. But I think that, to ask questions that go deeper than what did you do this weekend, that really get at what are you feeling, what are you experiencing, what are your pain points, that we have to be willing to ask ourselves and know the answer, and be willing to hold space in non-judgment for whatever comes up, without having to solve for it either, right? Without having to fix, but just to say, I just want to hear, right? And then you can decide what Is there something in that you can impact? Is there something in there that's your responsibility? But I feel like to create spaces that are psychologically safe, where people can trust that what they share isn't going to come back and bite them in the butt, that leaders have to be willing to do their own work, their own inner work, to understand what's going on with them so that they can hold space for others. Because if we're not empathetic with ourselves, how can we possibly be, hold space for others? So, and that, that kind of comes down to getting the support that you need, whether that's coaching, whether that's training and development, whatever that is, so that you can be willing to sit in uncomfortable conversations, because that is the right thing to do. And that is how we bring humanity forward, by being willing to sit in the discomfort and discover what is there for us. That is maybe beautiful and maybe messy, but it's not all going to be pretty. And I think that because we're dealing with humanity, that's part of what we have to realize. This isn't going to be a gloss over, to do the real work. It's going to be uncomfortable. So, how can we set ourselves up to be okay with that?
So Tosca, it sounds like it's about creating space to process and discover answers for ourselves in order to be able then to, in turn, hold the space to help employees or team members process. But I think that we're seeing a lot more burnout now during the pandemic. And I'm wondering what employees can do to better safeguard their mental health, and also what companies can do to help support employees.
Yeah, I mean, I know we have mental health experts here. I think what I'll just say about that is that, when individuals, right, also it's the same thing, to understand yourself, to understand what you need. Just that question alone, I think, can be life-changing. To just stop and say, I'm feeling triggered today, I'm struggling, I'm really emotional, like, what do I need? But I'll hand it over to my colleagues here that probably have much deeper responses to that question.
I think, Holly, to that particular question, for me, it's as simple as thinking about some simple ABCs, right? So when we're looking at employees and safeguarding mental health and what employers need to do, some of the things we need to be paying attention to is teaching employees how to advocate for themselves based off of their awareness, right? So those would be the A's. One, be aware of what your needs are. Be aware of what makes you more productive. Be aware of what makes you feel valued and safe, because then you're going to take that information and you're going to advocate for yourself. You can't approach a problem without a solution. So, and that solution comes in the form of advocacy, right? I think the next piece are those B's, those boundaries and behaviors. One thing that I notice and I really emphasize with my clients is that no one is going to respect your boundaries if you don't respect your own boundaries. If you set a boundary to say, I'm off work at 4, and then you're still responding to emails at 4:30, you cannot be surprised when your boss sends you a response at 5 o'clock, because you have crossed your own boundary and now they think it's okay to cross that boundary. So pay attention to what your boundaries are, and then make sure that your behaviors align with your boundaries. So we've covered that A and that B. And then that C would be challenge. Challenge what is happening in the workplace and create change. And of course, when you're challenging, you have to have some emotional regulation, right? We want to bring in the emotions, like Julius is saying. We want to see some of the passion and the power and the excitement when we're challenging, but not to the degree that it overshadows the message. So you want to be able to challenge what is happening in the workplace in a very emotionally aware and regulated way, and create solutions for change. So again, going back to those ABCs, right? That advocacy that's based in awareness, those boundaries with behaviors that align with that, and challenging with the overall goal of change.
Thank you. That's great. ABCs. I'll remember that.
You know, I'm a nerdy educator. It always has to come back to literature, right? Yeah.
Well, and and I think that goes back, to even how we started this, like, right, which is like, I think when when employees, right, they don't know how to hold their boundaries, right? And then all of a sudden it's like way out of whack. And then it's like they don't know how to kind of retrain themselves and the people around them to expect something different. And so I think what a lot of people end up doing is they end up leaving because they figure, well, it's just easier to kind of restart those boundaries somewhere else where I haven't set this precedent. And I think that there's an opportunity to kind of assess, well, what if you just experimented where you were, right? Assuming like all things equal, right? Assuming you're in a healthy, work environment, to say, okay, actually, I'm gonna start setting different boundaries, and I think that that can make a world of difference for people to realize you can do it where you are. You don't necessarily have to leave to live your values and your beliefs now, especially because so many of those values and beliefs have changed over the past year and a half, because we've all changed, companies have changed, and now we're assessing, who are we now that we know more about ourselves and what's really important to us? And then how do I take action on that in an environment where people are used to the old me,
I think boundaries, another word for boundaries, are like setting rules or parameters. And part of the issue could be is that there are no rules or parameters in this new digital hybrid era, where we're finding people are logging on an extra 2 hours a day, and we're, at least during lockdown, home all the time. So you can send off an email at, 9 p.m. at night. You can work on the weekend because, people assume, oh, you can't go anywhere. Anyways, I think that's a huge issue, is there's no boundary saying, we don't send emails after this time. We don't do work on the weekend. And so it started to creep into all these crevices of our life. So yeah, we have been able to take walks in the middle of the day, and that's been nice. But I think a lot of people are also working around the clock. And I'm wondering, it's hard to set boundaries as an individual employee. So is this something that has to come from leadership? And what are some kind of creative solutions for making this sustainable?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that, Holly. We have this sort of archaic phrasing of mandatory meetings in the workplace, and I think we need to start mandating play, rest, and pleasure. During the workday, we actually mandate that our folks get an hour at least of self-care during the workday. So I literally want to go on your calendar and see when your weekly self-care hour is. So that is a signal to me and everybody else on the team, do not bother this particular staff person during this hour, because that is literally, you wouldn't try to call them if you saw that they were in a meeting with an investor during this time. So they're in a meeting, probably the most meaningful meeting of all with themselves during this hour. So I think we need, I kind of jokingly said mandate pleasure and rest, but I think we need to have that kind of sort of outlook on it. And from, more of a zoomed out perspective, when we think of budgeting and our bottom line, we budget for everything else. We budget for technology. We budget for staff. We budget for other items that are necessary for the success of our businesses and organizations. But very seldomly do we budget for play, rest, and pleasure as it relates to our staff and our team members. I think that managers, program directors, CEOs, executive level C-suite folks have to become more intentional about saying, where is the money in our budget to pour into our people when it comes to play, rest, and pleasure? And that is a part of our bottom line, right? That is something that we can connect to revenue generation and retention and employee satisfaction. I don't know what the data is suggesting up until this point, but it can support all of those things in a very positive way. So we're trying to get more creative about that, and being upfront with investors and funders and donors, and saying that, hey, some of your support will be used to support the wellness of our people. It's like, why is it easier to get people to donate for us to support and take care of the wellness of others? But then when we say we want to take care of the wellness of the people who are doing the work, it's like, why would you want to do that? It's like, it's sort of this weird juxtaposition of like, the same exact ask.
Mm.
And I think, two pieces to this. I mean, one is, as we look at how much our jobs have changed a lot. Many people, the businesses had to pivot, or the way that you work, virtually versus in person has changed the, context of your job. Maybe because of this great resignation and we're losing people within the organization, you've had to take on more responsibility that previously been on others' plates. And so this one aspect is that transparency of being able to say, okay, here's everything on my plate and I can only do so much, and I need to either offload some or just not do it, right? That whole start, stop, and keep conversation, I think, is one that all businesses need to be having right now, because your workers are just keep piling more on, and it's hard to set boundaries, and it's hard to create limits when the to-do list is endless. But to that end, something that we've been doing at Ellevate is really experimenting with the 4-day work week. We saw that our employees were not taking enough time for self-care. Early on in the pandemic, we started this Treat Yourself Tuesday, where we did a drawing every week, and someone on the team would get $50, and we'd say, take a day off and treat yourself, take that time for you. Even if we can't leave the house right now, get a Netflix subscription or a book or order takeout, whatever it is that will just help you just make that space for yourself. And it had such a positive impact on the team, where it was just wow, I didn't know how much I needed that day. Me personally, when it was my Treat Yourself Tuesday, I was whoa, I needed that. So we started every other week as a 4-day work week. I think that this is, again, looking at the structures and systems that our businesses are built on, counterintuitive to, the 40-hour work week, and we need to be working these hours, and we need to be in the office. No. What we've found is, as we've, given our team that space to, take for themselves, their mental health, their physical well-being, to, not just, have another weekend day full of activities, but this is a time for them. And it's really helped. They've said that they're more focused on the work they do those other 4 days. They're really happy in the office. They feel more engaged. They have more clarity and space to think when they're not just inundated 24/7. And so those are things too, where companies need to start exploring and get a little uncomfortable with that exploration. I'll be honest, as a business leader who grew up during a time where FaceTime really mattered, it was hard for me to really lean into this. I was like, I don't know, what is the implications? But the research shows that this works, and our own experiences show that it works. So, as Dr. Plummer said, when we put the employee first in that human-centric mindset, you start to say, well, what's best for them that will help them do their job at the best way they can? And then how do I support that? And maybe that's changing business the way that we've known it. But this is the time to do it. And it's an exciting way to move forward and to really show your employees that their well-being is top of mind.
Yeah, and I don't have the research in front of me, but no one is productive all 8 or 9 hours of the workday. I think you need to take a break every 52 minutes. And the study in Iceland of going to the 4-day work week showed people are working less hours and they are just as productive as before. We have a comment I see in the comments section, so many companies are raising the pressure and demands, creating a culture of unrealistic expectations. And I think that's what people are struggling with. And maybe that's a huge part behind this great resignation, is just not being able to create the boundaries, not feeling like they can, not having the time, companies not giving them the time. And to Julius's point, I love the self-care hour. I don't know the research on self-care during the workday, but studies show that taking a vacation obviously makes you more creative, more productive. And there's also health benefits like lower risk of diabetes, lower risk of heart attack. That's incredible. So why are we still sticking to this structure?
Well, and Holly, one quick add to all of this, awesome conversation. I just want to give everybody a bear hug. Yes, if everybody just took one nugget from this conversation, that's listening out there, we create a much better working environment. But here's my thing, right? I think it comes also down to, we got to dig deeper on this boundary thing. down to this idea of like, what is the business strategy and what are the priorities? Because I think what happens is when leaders aren't willing to make those tough choices, it just is going to roll downhill. And so companies have to really take a look at what are you really trying to achieve? And is achieving all 10 of those priorities really realistic? Or do you need to actually think differently about what you're doing in the marketplace and how you're going to do it to get better results? And so I think really getting to the fundamentals of business strategy will help get out of this spin. And I'm not saying it's easy, and it's definitely new behaviors and new habits, but like I think that will help with the workload and the unrealistic expectations that are happening right now. To one of our viewers' point.
Yeah, I want to add to that, Tosca. One of the things, and I know we're getting close to time here, that we didn't acknowledge that we can have another conversation on is the impact of the pandemic directly on the workload, right? There are a lot of organizations and companies that their workload drastically increased because they were excellent at what they do. They are excellent at what they do. So the companies and organizations that were maybe downsizing and short-staffed and losing people, somebody is picking up that responsibility. Some organization and company is picking up those clients and serving them to some degree, right? And then what has to happen in that moment? You have exponential growth. You have to start hiring more people. You have one person who's now doing the job of 3 people or 2 people. So that is having a direct impact on the mental, psychological, and emotional well-being of each employee, and on the way that employers and our C-suite executives are managing those priorities, as Tosca said. So like that the demand that was placed onto a lot of organizations to do more and to sustain more in the midst of a global pandemic, I think we need to be assessing that and looking at how that impacted folks and will continue to impact our growing and the ones that are not growing, that are sort of going in the other direction as well.
Absolutely. My thought around it, Holly, is that we need to get to the top a little bit faster, right? So I recognize that our folks that are in our C-suite are often focused on business development, and it's the managers and supervisors that are having the direct interactions with the staff. And so when we have these types of conversations or we come up with these kind of solutions, I'm not sure if the right people are necessarily hearing it. When we're talking about needing to make company and organization shifts, it needs to be the shift in the mindset of the CEO, of the COO, of the people who are thinking all the time and then delegating the information down. Sometimes we get into this game of telephone, right, where the information gets stopped somewhere and it shifts, and the right people don't hear it at the right moment. And so if we could start being creative around how do we get in front of CEOs and start getting them to think about emotional intelligence? How do we get them to start thinking about the fact that their staff members are going through these existential crises, like you mentioned earlier, where they're trying to think about what is their purpose and what is their meaning and how does this particular job or career path align with their purpose and why they're on this earth. When we start getting CEOs to shift and not just thinking about business or not just profit and revenue as the bottom line, but humans and the people that are working with them, then I think we're going to see the shifts happen a lot greater. The challenge is that many CEOs are of the old school mentality in which they believed in face-to-face interaction and they believed in certain structures. And now we're recognizing that there's a cultural divide because a lot of the people who are doing the work are not of the same culture of the people who are running the business. And so there's this pushback. And so it's not just on the employee to make the shift, the organizations have to make the shift and they have to be wanting to make the shift. And so when we go back to the topic of the Great Resignation, what it's causing is a lot of CEOs to think, what is happening, right? Because I'm losing all of my people. And now we're finally getting the attention of the CEOs to say, Look at emotional intelligence, look at humanity, look at who these people are, their needs, their values, their experiences, and not just their skill sets. We are not robots out here. We are humans that have so much value to add to a business. And now we're finally getting their attention through resignations. So that's why I believe that some of these resignations are boundary settings. It's saying, hey, pay attention to me. Okay, you don't want to pay attention to me? I'm going to leave. And if enough people say that, we're going to get the attention at the top to be able to have these conversations so that they can listen in on top conversations like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hope that, this does create a transformation in the workplace. I know we only have 4 minutes left, and I wanted to end with an action step or takeaway for the people listening, but I'm a working mom, so this is an important question for me. I wanted to direct towards Kristy. So we're seeing women and mothers in particular leaving the workforce at higher rates right now during the pandemic, with women of color and Black women leaving at even higher rates. So I just wanted to get, what do you think we need to do to reverse this trend?
I mean, just do something. I mean, to be honest, do something, right? Our workplaces don't support working caregivers. That is a bold statement, but if you look at policy, if you look at the private sector and paid leave, and not just paid leave for maternity leave, there's caregiver leave. We have an aging population where we're taking care of parents and others as well. We need space just to process and have space for ourselves too. So we are in a place where stigma still exists. The stigma around, who's able to show up, who can travel, who can put in the time. We live in a system that, again, wasn't built for women, and particularly for people of color. It was built many, many, many years ago, and we need to disrupt that because it was built for, predominantly white men who had the freedom and flexibility to go into the office, to travel, to put in that face time. So, the bigger thing is just have a hard look at your systems, your structures. Who are you supporting? Who is represented in your leadership? Who's represented within your organization? How are you creating the space to really speak one-on-one and individually with those in your organization that are caregivers or people of color, to understand their lived experiences? I just saw a stat that 3% of people of color want to return to the workforce. And that is a stat that we need to look at and to shine a light on why that is. Because not return to the workforce, return to the office. Because there's so many situations and microaggressions, there's lack of support, lack of, mentorship that is happening that don't make the office a hospitable place, a place where many of your workers want to be. And during this time where we've seen it in a different light, when we've seen, what can happen maybe when we're home, when we have space, when we're not exposed to microaggressions, we're able to, pivot between caregiving and working in a way that better suits us. You're not going to want to go back to that place that didn't see you, that didn't listen to you, and that didn't support you. So I think we've got a big issue here across the board. I mean, we can talk about the US policies on caregiving and beyond, but as an employer, as someone who has the ability and the power to listen to your workers, to create change and to create a system that works better for them, I implore you to do it. Now is the time to really step up, to lead by example, and to show your employees that you care about them and you care about their whole identity, not just, Kristy as employee, but Kristy as human, who has many hats and many responsibilities, and will opt to be a caregiver beyond showing up for a workplace that doesn't care about me.
Yeah. And caregiving has traditionally been undervalued because it's unpaid labor, but raising the next generation of leaders is such an important job, and caring for the aging parents who cared for us there's power and there's value in that. So thank you.
I would say caregiving doesn't stop either. I mean, in the middle of the panel, you saw me looking down, it was my kids texting me with some emergency. I mean, it doesn't end. Like we can't just leave those identities at the door. So we have to, embrace that and provide the flexibility for people and our employees to really show up in the way that makes sense for them.
Yeah. We're getting so many great questions from the audience. I wish we had time to answer them. We're at time. We'll try to respond to your answers in the comments just to let everybody know. We'll write back to you. But the last question I wanted to ask is, what's one action step that leaders of all levels can take, or micro progression, as we call it at Consciously Unbiased, to help people feel happier at work? Tosca, you want to go?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to just say, right, like happiness, right, is an inside job, right? But I know what you're getting at, right? Look, I think that if organizations are clear with their purpose and their mission and like why they exist, and can really live those values of why they exist, and give their employees the why, right? That can go so far in employees feeling like they're showing up for something that actually matters. That would be it's small, but it's like not small, if you know what I mean. But like, be clear on your mission and communicate that and help people feel like they are a part of it, so that they wake up saying, this is really what I'm here to do.
Love that. Julius?
Yeah, I would echo some of that, and saying we need to be modeling what it is that we're preaching. I think oftentimes we talk about things just from this external, outward facing lens of here's what we should be doing. If I'm saying it and preaching it, but not living it and embodying that and emanating that same energy is so real. There have been numerous amounts of times where our team members have said, they've expressed to me the type of energy that I'm giving out, whether it be good energy, whether it be flat energy, wherever the energy is, your team and the people around you can feel it. So we have to really embody that healing energy, that wellness energy, that happy, joyful energy, because it really is contagious. And I think it permeates throughout the organizational and company culture as a result.
Thank you. Kristy?
Yeah, I mean, my advice is just to get a little uncomfortable. As leaders, we need to get uncomfortable in, understanding where we're succeeding, where we're failing, and trying different ways to lead and to structure companies. In, being vulnerable to what's happening in this world and how it's impacting our workers. And really thinking differently about business, not just about the revenues and profits and P&L, but about how our greatest asset, our employees, are driving that, and how the more we invest in them and the more we support them, the better holistically our business will be. So I just think, as a leader in this whole conversation, as I've been listening, I keep thinking that would make me uncomfortable, but it's time to be uncomfortable because that is what's going to help keep our employees in the workforce, keep them within our organization, and open us up to new possibilities.
Thank you. Dr. Plummer?
I don't have anything to add. No, I'm just kidding, right? That's so not me. So I think that I know that I feel happy, and that my staff and people that I interact with feel happy when they feel empowered. And generally that empowerment happens with two main things. One, when they have an opportunity to have a voice, which means that meeting times need to be extended just a little bit, or agendas need to be shifted just a little bit, so that you can hear from the folks that are working with you, where you ask them very direct questions that are related to their thoughts and their feelings and their behaviors. So very specifically asking for feedback so that they have a space to give a voice. And even with that feedback, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do what the staff member is saying, but you are open to hearing their ideas, because they may have some wonderful ideas that makes them feel great. First, because they say it, and second, because you're listening, and then ideally because you can implement some of that. So shifting some of these meetings and these agendas so that the voices of your staff members can be heard. And then the second point would be giving people options. We are adults. People don't like to be told every single thing to do. They want to know that they have some options and that their decisions are trusted. So when you have big decisions and even small decisions to make in the company, get some feedback from the staff. Put a little survey out there. Go to the water cooler. Come in and have a quick Zoom call and get the information back. When we make decisions at Onyx, we go to our staff and say, you can do this, or you can do this, or you can present a third option. But I find that makes people feel more invested in the company. They feel more engaged, and they have a higher sense of morale, which means that they have, going back to Julius, that higher energy that comes back in their productivity, that comes back in the way they interact with their clients. So making sure that people feel empowered and heard, and structuring that, and also making sure that people have options, that they're not mandated to do everything, but that they can get to pick and choose certain things in the process.
Thank you. Those are all concrete takeaways, and I appreciate each of you and your insights and showing up here today to sharing your thoughts. So thank you very much. It was great speaking to you all. Have a great day.
See you later.
Bye.